Hello, my fiery friends, the Infernoman here with the latest in Midweek Magic technology. And for today's deck type, we're going to be jumping into the Midweek Magic event to play in the... Actually, what are we exactly playing this week? Oh, it's just Explorer.
Yes.
Nothing special, I guess. Alright, well, I guess that's fine. If any case, if nothing else, we can definitely build the deck so it's not only something you can enjoy for the event, but you can also take it with you and carry it into the actual Explorer format, so we'll set up even a sideboard for this deck. So without further ado, let's go ahead and show you what we're playing this week. And it's going to be called Wicked Auras. But before we continue, if you do like any of the content that I do, please like, follow, and subscribe wherever you watch the content so you don't miss out on any of the gameplay, booster pack openings, deck decks, and so much more. But as always, before we get going, we need to talk about, of course, the stats of the deck. So we're looking at an average mana curve about really low 1.6. We're playing Orzhov colors of mostly white with a splash of black. We're looking at about 16 creatures in deck, 2 instants, 22 enchantments, and 20 lands to round it out. Now, when it comes to an Auras deck, normally you probably think of Azorius Auras as the go-to version of the deck archetype in order to get to your victories.
Correct!
But what if I were to tell you that you actually can try a different version of it that allows you to give a lot more versatility and an alternate way of getting to your victory? And that's basically what Wicked Auras is trying to do. We're trying to balance out the offensive and defensive abilities of Auras in one package, thanks to a brand new card from Wilds of Eldraine. Ariat of the Charmed Apple. Ariat here is a 3-mana legendary human warlock that's a 2/4, where it says each creature that's enchanted by an aura you control can attack you or planeswalkers you control. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of auras you control. This one card right here allows us to give what originally auras an alternate win con, where normally in order to get to a victory with auras, you have to stack a ton of them onto your creatures, hopefully making it so big that your opponent can't deal with it and you get to your victory. However, what if those times you have that, your opponent maybe say goes wide or has a ton of chump blockers and prevents you from getting to your victory? Thanks to Ariat now, you now have an alternate way of just sitting there and just accumulating more and more auras, and eventually you'll drain out your opponent to get to your win. In order to do that, however, let's talk about the creatures that are going to be stacking auras on top of. Most of these shouldn't be anything different for anybody that's played auras in the past. Pretty much it's going to be the same usual suspects of Saram, Senior Edificer here. Saram basically can draw you cards every time we cast an aura spell. Light Pause is also essential to the deck. As we cast auras and they enter the battlefield, we can then search our library for more aura cards with the mana value of equal than or less to the aura with a different name, and then keep attaching them to Light Pause, and then this helps us get something that's really big and really hard to deal with. But otherwise, the other new creature that we've added to the deck is going to be Slumbering Keepguard. This simple little 1 mana may not seem like it does much, but every time an enchantment enters the battlefield, you get to scry 1, which is honestly not too shabby for a common, but the biggest payoff, of course, is its secondary ability, where you pay 3 and it gets a +1/+1 for each enchantment we control. As our deck is, of course, overfilling with enchantments thanks to the auras, we can definitely make this a big threat and sometimes even stack a bunch of auras onto it to ensure that we can get to victory with just that card. As far as the auras we're going to use to round out the package to provide our support, again, it's going to be a mix of offensive and defensive in the best of 1 version of this format. We're going to play some Cartouche Solidarities. An essential card gives us first strike and +1/+1, adds a token to the battlefield. Ethereal Armor and All That Glitters do the same thing, where they get +1/+1 to a creature for each enchantment we control. Ethereal Armor gives us first strike. All That Glitters is both counting enchantments and artifacts. We don't have artifacts in this deck, so that's not really something we worry about. As far as additional ways of getting through that damage, we have Evasion with Griff's Boon, which gives us a +1 and gives our creature flying. We can also recast it as well for 4 mana if we absolutely have to in a pinch. Sentinel's Eyes gives our creature +1/+1, and also we can exile it from the graveyard if we have to again recast it just like the Griff's Boon, and also gives our creature vigilance. Now, as far as the defensive options we have a little bit of a mix here, and you'll see why in just a second. For the aura defense, we have Kaya's Ghost Form, but also as an instant we have Loran's Escape. And then otherwise, for your defensive auras that you can stack onto your opponent's creatures, you have Clawing Torment here, where as this is added to a creature, the creature can't block, it gets -1/-1, and at the beginning of your upkeep, they lose 1 life, which stacks up very well with Ariat here, allowing us to drain out our opponent even faster. The other go-to option we have is going to be Ossification, which is why we're going to be playing again a budget version with lands, but again, Ossification needs a basic land to attach itself to, and then we can exile a creature or a planeswalker an opponent controls until Ossification leaves the battlefield. With the land base, it's going to be as simple as possible since we are on a budget. We're going to be playing with 7 plains, 4 swamps, A Restless Fortress here as our only other option. You don't actually have to utilize this creature land, but I wanted to give it a try, so I threw it in there since I got a copy of it. Since we are a budget, we're going to use the tap lands of Scoured Barrens here for some life gain as they enter the battlefield tapped, an Obscura Storefront here to help us fix our mana base, and ensure we also get a little extra life to help stabilize against aggro decks. You may be noticing that we do have actually a sideboard here, even though this format right now for Midweek Magic is actually a best of 1, not best of 3, but just in case for those of you who are interested in trying to take this into the actual Explorer formats out there, you can have a sideboard utilizing Tormod's Crypt for some graveyard hate. Duress is going to come in versus control decks out there. For go wide aggro decks, you have Trespasser's Curse, which can help us also life gain and drain against our opponent. Some extra copies of Griff Spoon if you want to go more offensive, same with the Sentinel's Eyes. If you want to have a much more better defensive creature, you have a Danto Vanguard here. This creature allows us to pay 4 life and gives it indestructible, and also it gets a +2/0 bonus if it does swing on its own, which is also pretty nice if we need to be, again, on the offensive. Otherwise, your extra auras are going to be Rune of Sustenance and Rune of Morality. The first one will give you life gain and also draws a card. Same thing with the other Rune of Mortality, draws us a card, but it gives our creature Death Touch. So it gives us some great defensive options against select decks out there. And finally, to round out the package, if you do need to go wide against your opponent, you have a single copy of Archon of Sun's Grace, where it creates 2/2 White Pegasus creature tokens whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under our control. If you want to have a bigger variety of auras, you can kind of mix and match how you need to if you want to play in this format, or if you just want to take it into regular ranked to have some fun with it. This also gives you a lot more targets with Light Paws here. If you are facing a lot of creature heavy decks out there, then you definitely want to keep in your Clawing Torments and Ossifications. If you are going to be dealing with maybe in the best of 1 format, or if you do want to play this in best of 3, bring in your Duresses, of course, just to make sure that you have what you need versus those control decks out there. Honestly, this deck is actually really sweet because you can mix and match what you need to. And as far as simple upgrades, if you are interested in making this even better, all you have to do is just upgrade the land base and you're pretty much set. You can actually put in a lot more of the shock lands and dual lands. Be very careful, however, again, because if you're going to take advantage of ossification here, you don't want to lose too many of your basics, because again, you're going to need them in order to make sure you have a target for that ossification. Otherwise, gameplay tips I'm going to give you, as you of course see the gameplay footage as we're talking right now, is make sure again to play everything you can on curve. If you do anticipate you're going to get some removal, you might want to hold off for a turn or two to get out your Saram, to get out your Light Paws, and then once the coast is clear, then start attaching auras and start going wide or start going big. Don't underestimate Slumbering Keep card. I've had many times where I played this card in testing, and honestly, a lot of people either take it as an immediate threat or they just ignore it, and the ability to fact that you can scry, if you do have a lot of triggers on the stack with say Saram or even Light Paws, as those triggers are resolving, keep the Slumbering Keep card's trigger on the final part of the stack, so this way that after you get all of your auras out and after you've drawn everything, Slumbering Keep card can again scry, so this way you can fix your next draw and ensure you can keep the chain of auras going. Otherwise, my only other final thing I want to say is I did have a lot of fun putting this deck together. I do like that there is now a different way of differentiating between the Azorius Auras deck, and now you can differentiate from that and the Orzhov Auras. So this way you have a much more bigger variety in terms of what you want to do out there. Instead of stacking everything onto one single creature to do one giant one-hit KO, instead you can slowly drain out your opponent and lock them out of the game as you constantly build up more and more auras, so even if you can't push through combat damage, you still have a way of getting to victory. And with that, my only other final thing I want to say is if you are a fan of auras, if you are a fan of looking at alternate win cons in this deck so you don't have to rely constantly on combat damage, I would definitely say give Orzhov Auras a try. And I assure you that when you manage to drain out your opponent with auras, even if they can't push through that damage, or even if you're in a little bit of a stalemate with their creatures, once you start draining them out with Ariete, I can assure you, you will definitely have a lot of fun doing so. It's a satisfying way to win, and you will not be disappointed. That's all I have for you today. Thanks again for watching, everyone, and just remember that no matter what you do play in the game of life, always be sure to burn bright. Later!